Hello, my name's Faye and today let's talk about the April books that I read and the tentative reading plans for May that I have so far. Let's kick off with the only book that I DNF'd in April. I did get to page 182 and then I decided to DNF The Dog of the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie. This was longlisted for the Women's Prize, didn't make it onto the shortlist, and follows Penny Rush, a woman somewhere in her 30s who, after getting a divorce, quitting, losing her job, we don't really know, travels to take care of some issues that arise with the house her grandmother is living in, and gets wrapped up in all kinds of family shenanigans. The thing with this is that it kicked off and I thought I was going to love it. Sort of the first 40 pages, I got sucked in. Pages made me, like sentences made me laugh. Pages of it were really humorous. Some of the characterizations of the sort of side cast were really stellar. But we don't get to know our protagonist at all, and at the solid more than halfway point I want to know more than the trope of my life goes up in flames. So with the help of a scraggly cast, I find a new purpose of life. That doesn't really cut it for me. Plus, I think that trope is even misleading. Even though I've decided not to finish it, I think this book will just leave you feeling unfinished. It's really random. The story, that the pacing is off. At this midway point, a large shift in scene happens. She travels from the US to Australia to look for her parents who have gone missing. And yes, that's a spoiler, but also maybe it's not, because maybe we never get any answers. I decided to DNF it. I have a very hard time DNFing books, but as I was noticing that this was just slowing me down, I felt like I had to read this. I wasn't picking up other books that I thought I would feel like reading more. I had to give this one the boot. And then amusingly, the 5 books that I have to talk about I read in April, in chronological order, we'll also be reading from a book that I enjoyed reading the least up until the most, starting with I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. This was also longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and too many surprised people, me included, didn't make it onto the shortlist. In this, our unnamed narrator is obsessed both with the man she wants to be with and the woman. Does she just call her? I don't know. The woman who's also having an affair with the man she wants to be with. So by already talking about the story in this weird convoluted way, we know there are no names. These people already serve as foils for types of people that are just abundant in a social media world that is obsessed with sort of self-marketing. The woman she online stalks, who's also having an affair with the same man, is this privileged, white, rich woman, young woman who has a famous father and has a perfectly curated, artsy, organically conscious Instagram profile. The man our protagonist is also sleeping with is this self-righteous white guy who has been in a marriage for a long time. Everyone knows he's never going to leave her, but he has affairs with many a young woman to, I don't know, fill the void that is his ego. And our protagonist does, in side sentences, comment on how race fits into these stereotypes of people and how this whole fame that is wrapped around representing a type of person nurtures a type of racism in the UK. No, UK, US. Oh, I'm actually blanking. I think this is set in the UK. I think she references London a few times. And even though so much of this is really interesting, even just the narration structure with like these short little vignettes, I did feel myself being very detached from the story, and I felt increasingly annoyed with most of the characters, all of the characters really, and a few sort of side quests were opened up in this storyline and never really resolved. So even though like the idea is an A, the execution to me was a middling C, and therefore I was actually a little bit disappointed with this one, even though I can recognize and respect why someone else will have really vibed with this book. It's not a bad book. I think my irritation got in the way for me to really love it. Next, I read Maud Martha by Gwendolyn Brooks, which is a very beautiful edition. Gwendolyn Brooks, I'd never read anything before. She's mainly known for her poetry, and I'm not much of a poetry reader. This is her only novel, and she, I believe, is the first Black woman to win the Pulitzer Prize. And in this, we follow a young girl, sort of a slim coming of age story of a girl living in Chicago in the 40s or 50s. Well, and then she gets older and then it's the 50s. And even though the writing is actually pretty beautiful, I am starting to forget most of what happens in this book. She does get married, and that relationship with this man who is slightly lighter in color, who sort of schmoozes up to other, especially white men in the army, and wants to sort of enter a different social class. That relationship I found interesting, but again, because there are very sort of short chapters and they are very lyrical, I felt like we were watching this story from a distance. The writing is something else though. Maybe I'll just read out the very first sentence, because I think it starts with such a bang. First chapter is description of Maud Martha. What she liked was candy buttons and books and painted music, deep blue or delicate silver, and the west sky, so altering, viewed from the steps of the back porch, and dandelions. I think I actually read this out somewhere else as well when I was hauling it. I'm not sure. Lyrically, amazing. The story needed more pages, I think. Then for a bit of a drastic genre switch, I read Such a Pretty Smile by Christy DeMaester. This is a horror book about a mother and a daughter. The daughter is a teenager. She's coming to terms with the fact that she's in love with her female best friend and is too afraid to tell her. She's also starting to maybe see things, and this is definitely a horror novel that plays with the trope of, is it mental health or is it a monster? And usually I find that quite irritating, but it is so plotty and thrilling, and we switch between points of view of the mother and the daughter. And I picked this up initially because it is blurbed as a feminist horror novel. I wanted to know what that meant. It promised to be a story that comments on this expectations that girls should be quiet and well adapted and tame, and if they don't just smile and become difficult and loud, we socially sanction them. And I'm not sure it actually did this. It did in parts, but the character of the mother arguably was the more interesting role, and because her main storyline that parallels the daughters, because that was in the past, we didn't get to see all of that. I am being really vague, I realize, but this is a very like thrillery, fast-paced horror novel, so I don't really want to spoil it for you. Maybe look at the cover. This does actually give away quite a bit. There's sort of like spooky, gory nature themes. Check trigger warnings. I think with horror novels you really often should. But I actually really enjoyed the reading experience. I'm undecided what I thought of the ending, but I am always really, really glad to discover female horror authors. There are not many that I've come across that I can really, really champion. And I believe, at least in my copy, seems to have been published in 2023. So maybe a new one that's not on your radar yet. And if anyone is tempted to pick this one up, I would really like to talk about it. With the same rating of 7.43 in a core pile rating, 74% out of 100, let's just say, I read Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow, which was also longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, but didn't make it onto the shortlist. In this, we follow 3 generations of women who live in Memphis. 3 generations of women of the same family, and sisterhood throughout the generations is a really strong theme. I am undecided whether I thought the non-chronological switch back and forth between the different characters and the different years, whether that worked or not. In the beginning, I found it slightly confusing because we don't have the grandma in the 40s, the daughter in the 70s, and the granddaughter in the 90s. We have these 3 characters at all different years and points in their life, which makes sense, right? But it still felt a bit cumbersome to get into the chronological story that was being told. There were some beautiful parts. I cried a little multiple times, and I don't tend to do that much. And again, I am unsure whether that is due to the really heavy topics. A lot of racism and police brutality is talked about in Memphis, and whether that was done really well or whether it was done purposefully to pull at my heartstrings. I wrote down, because I read this in a digital copy, so I can't show you the book, but I wrote down 2 quotes, and let's just listen to those and see if they resonate. He had always been a natural storyteller, born out of his sense of ease with other people and himself. So here we have a characterization of a male in the story, and yes, even though we do follow the women of this family, their relationships to the men in their lives are very important as well, and very romantic as well in parts. And then later on in the book we get the quote, "History had awakened me to the fact that racism is the only food Americans crave." So this really situates you in the political commentary on racism in this book. If this is a topic that you like, and if you like family sagas, I think Memphis is a really solid book. I am still undecided on it though, whether it was sensitive and tender and emotional, or whether it was a bit too blockbustery and manipulated me as a reader. And then finally, I have it down here, I'll pick it up. I read Die Kinder sind Könige by Delphine de Vigan, which is a French book translated into German by Doris Heinemann, and it's not been translated to English as far as I can tell, but I'll talk about it here anyway because I read it, I really enjoyed it, and I'm wondering whether you can think of any other English books that cover similar themes. In this, crime novel. I am carefully labeling this. We follow a family vloggers whose 6-year-old daughter, 5-year-old daughter disappears, goes missing, and the police get called to the scene, and a search for this girl ensues. And within the pages there is a lot of commentary on the legal situation around family vlogging, while childhood stars of TV and cinema and music are protected under certain laws. And it is also clearly defined how they make their money, how many hours they can work. This whole YouTube family vlogging sphere is not protected in that same sense. We also get commentary on wanting to be visible in social media and what that has done to us as a society. There's also, around the maybe like 3/4 point of the book, an interesting time jump, which I won't spoil for you, but again, that did challenge me as a reader to sort of continue the thought experiment. And I must admit, I was thinking of a family vlogger, a family vlogger, full point, a family that vlogs, when I was reading this, that I did watch the odd video like 10 years ago, and then started sort of Googling sort of what has happened to these people. And I must admit that even though some of the repercussions of this lifestyle and work were common sense, I hadn't put that much thought on them. And after reading this book, I really, really think differently about posting children on the internet. I'm not even gonna judge that more than just saying that, because I mean, essentially I'm very glad that I don't have to decide on any legislation around that topic, but this sort of sucks you in, and it becomes more and more harrowing, and it is so close to the truth, close to the real life, that at times it was actually a little bit claustrophobic to read this. So yeah, some of Delphine de Vigan's earlier works have been translated into English, so maybe this will be translated in the future. But yeah, let me know if you have some good recommendations for books that deal with sort of social media, because I think there were also really, really shoddy ones, and this was good. This was nuanced. This wasn't too on the nose. So this is like a strong 4-star in my books. The final book that I read in April. And let me talk about 3 books briefly that I am considering reading in May. In May, there are 2 readathons, both with their own prompts to go along with it that are cool. But because my reading plans didn't work out that well in April as I had planned, I am going to just stick to the main theme of the readathon, and then post ad hoc try to fit the books that I did read into the reading prompts. We have Misery May, hosted by Gemma and Scott, for which I'm hoping to read my very first Thomas Hardy novel. I'm not entirely sure on which one that will be. I will probably read along with the buddy read, which is Jude the Obscure. I'm excited for this, and this is definitely a book I wouldn't have picked up by myself, but I think in the community of others it'll be interesting. I also bought The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan, which I will be reading with a new reading club, book club in Berlin. I'm excited for this one. This is a feminist dystopian novel. So many out there. I hope this does something special or different. Maybe this will also be good for Misery May. I'm not sure. And the other readathon that I always really, really love, and it runs in the first 2 weeks of May this year, is the Springathon, hosted by Curious Reader. And I, again, will not be fulfilling the reading prompts. The whole goal of this readathon is to read nature nonfiction. And I just picked up 2 unread nature nonfiction books on my shelves that I am both excited about. Small Bodies of Water by Nina Minya Powles was also recommended by the hosts of the readathon, so I thought that was fitting. And then I also have Alice Vincent's Rootbound, which it talks about a struggling, grieving woman who sort of digs her way out of that by gardening. And that's something that I do really, really like in nature writing, this sort of melding of memoir writing and nature writing. So those 2 both of them I've heard really good things about. And I really love nature writing, with the Wainwright Prize rolling up, I think in June. They will be announcing the long list. This is a good opportunity to read backlist nature writing books and get excited for that kind of sub-genre of books. Give me any book recommendations that you can think about down below. I hope you had a really good April reading month as well. I'm looking forward to my reading in May and hope to see you very soon. Bye.